Good morning. It's Gary Sly. It's January the 2nd of the new year, 2024. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope your holidays were pleasant and successful and warm and peaceful and all those wonderful things. It's exciting to think about all the opportunities the new year holds. I hope you've got some projects ready to stitch or something that you want to make during this year. I am back in my framing area this morning. I've had a couple questions about framing and thought I might spend a little time today talking about some things that might be helpful to you at home as you're thinking about framing some of your pieces. I do want to mention that my intro today is a lovely machine quilted piece that I have for sale here in the shop. One of my subscribers asked about it, so I thought I'd do a quick little video of that. And just by way of a tiny little commercial, if you do see something here in the shop that you're interested in, if I pass by something hanging on the wall, or if there's a pattern or even one of the handmade items like that quilt that you're interested in, feel free to message me. I'm happy to ship, and you know, the stuff is here to enjoy and for people to buy, so I don't mind doing that. I can invoice you by email or text. All I need is a mailing address and a way to contact you. So that's a tiny little commercial there as we get started. I must say I love framing needlework. I think I'm pretty good at it because I understand a bit about what it takes to go into stitching. I was lucky enough to learn framing from my friend Sally Criswell up in Trenton, Florida, who'd been doing it for 30 plus years. She allowed me to come in and just kind of learn at her elbow, and then eventually, before her shop closed, I was doing pretty much all of her framing. So total, I've probably been framing about 10 years. And as I say, my specialty is always our needlework pieces, because I think if you know a little bit about needlework and cross stitch and those sort of things, you've got a little bit better of a handle on how to frame them. So I just want to kind of pass along some helpful hints today and some things that you might want to think about. Of course, there are many other ways to finish your pieces, so you don't have to frame everything. Maybe we'll do some segments on some of those items as well. If you're as old as I am, which means you're a baby boomer, you probably remember a point where framing got very expensive. I know as a young adult, I would take things in to frame pretty frequently, and the prices were not that high. And I kind of wondered why the price of framing went up so much more than other items. And I think lately I've come up with an answer to that question. I deconstructed a piece that I had framed back in the 80s, and when I took it apart to remat it and redo some things, I found that they were really just using plain old cardboard. They weren't using acid-free products. The problem with that is that if you're using plain old cardboard, if you're using masking tape to edge your pieces, if you're using any of those readily available everyday products, even some mat board that's not acid-free, you're putting your stitching at great risk because the acid will seep into your fibers and eventually eat it away. I warn people all the time, do not put masking tape around the edge of your piece before you start stitching, because plain old masking tape has acid in it and it will erode that fabric. If you want it to be a legacy, you would want to do something else. You would want to serge the edges. They do make special acid-free tape, which you know we framers would use, and there are other ways to edge your projects, but certainly from a standpoint of working at home and getting your projects ready, don't put tape on them. And if you're a home framer, if you decide to put your things together in your own frames, you're saving a lot of money by doing that, but be aware that if you're using any surface that's commercially made and not made just for framing, it likely has acid in it. Pieces of cardboard, old boxes, things like that. The whole process for how they're made includes an acid which breaks down the fibers in the wood. So try to avoid that sort of thing. So when I work in the shop, I use a foam board that's going to be acid free. You see it's got a little bit of a thickness to it. Generally, this is what I mount cross-stitch pieces on. I cut the piece to size. There are several different ways that you can mount your projects. Certainly before you get ready to mount them, you want them to be nice and smooth and wrinkle-free. My process for the most part is just to take a piece, dip it in water, and while it's still damp, press it really good. This is a commission piece that I just finished, and you can see it's got a lot of wrinkles in it. I'm going to dunk it in water. I'm going to put it face down on a perfectly clean white towel, and then as it dries, I'm going to press it and steam it with my iron, and generally that'll get rid of all the wrinkles. If you are a stitcher who uses hoops, you're going to find those marks particularly hard to get rid of. So I would urge you, if you do use a hoop when you're stitching and you want to frame that piece, try to take that hoop off every night when you're finished stitching, because those marks are very hard to get rid of. That's why as a stitcher, I stitch in hand. I learned the hard way. I've got pieces from the 80s and the 90s, and you can still see the hoop marks. And sometimes they're almost impossible to get rid of. It really depends on the quality of the fabric you're using. If you're a needle pointer, there are a couple things that I would say to you. If you're just using needlepoint wools or threads, and you're just doing plain old tent stitches, which means just going back and forth, probably at the end of that process, your needlepoint is going to be kind of wonky like this, because all of your stitches are going in the same direction. As opposed to cross stitch, where you're making X's which are even, in needlepoint you're going to be making that kind of a shift. So there are two ways that you can approach that. If you would put your needlepoint canvas on a frame and tack it down nice and tight, that will avoid the stretching and the movement. Or you can learn how to do basket weave, which is not very hard. In fact, I'll spend some time one session talking a little bit about how to do basket weave, particularly for the larger areas. If you're doing a pillow, say, and you've got a design in the middle and needlepoint, it's not so important that you do basket weave for the design in the middle, but when you get ready to do the background, you want to look at the basket weave stitch, because that'll help keep it from shifting to the side. It'll make it much more straight. Now, if I get a needlepoint piece in the shop and it's badly warped, I will put it on a stretching board and go through the process of straightening it out. But just like with the hoop marks and some of those things I was talking about with cross stitch, if your needlepoint is kind of wonky, sometimes it'll kind of boing back into that same perspective. It's hard to get rid of that completely. So frame it up or use basket weave is a good way to help you there. Now, I guess there's many ways to choose frames and mats and glass as there are people, but I'll pass along some of my recommendations to you, and you can take them or leave them depending on what you like. First, I would say that most of your needlework should be behind glass. I've learned the hard way through the years. When I was poor and didn't put glass in things, they have suffered much more through the years than those that have glass. You're not aware of it, but even, like a smoky frying pan in the kitchen that might drift out into the rest of your house could impact the look and the color of your stitching. I recommend conservation glass. It does preserve your work. It does help protect it from sunlight and just kind of the regular life around us. I do not recommend non-glare. Non-glare glass is more expensive and it distorts your work. The whole point of non-glare means that it has your eye look at it from a different perspective. And from my perspective, when I think about the stitches that I've done, I want them to be seen clearly. So I don't recommend non-glare, but if somebody wants it, obviously I'll do that. Sometimes also I have people come in and ask for museum glass. Museum glass for us framers is 2 or 3 times more expensive than conservation glass. It is wonderful. I don't find that for the day-to-day activities that you and I might have and the uses we might have for it, that it's worth that kind of money though. It does protect in a similar way to conservation glass. You would want museum glass if you had a piece from the 1700s and you knew that it was something that might eventually show up in a museum or would have that kind of significance. So again, I keep museum glass. I charge you the 2 or 3 times it costs because that's what it costs me, but I don't know that you need that for the most part. Conservation glass is generally just fine. Frames, those are up to the individual as well. When you think about frames, you're probably used to more traditional kind of frames that are wood. Most framing shops you go into will have all kinds of ideas. I do urge you sometime to think a little bit about the piece itself. And when you're trying to decide a frame, think a little bit about what colors will set off the piece. Now this, as I told you, is a commission piece I just finished. And when I look at this, I'm thinking traditional. It's a commemorative piece for somebody who's been in the Navy. So I might want a more traditional kind of wood as a frame. The other thing I was thinking about with this one is because the eagle has all the wood tones, that a nice wood frame would be nice. But then think a little bit about what you want from a mat perspective. Because the nice thing about, let me get over here a little bit and grab some mats. The nice thing about using mats in your work is that then you can kind of pull out the colors, and it's not going to be perfect that I'm holding it up like this, but see, if I were to use a blue or a red, I would think those would be nice because they would help bring out some of the lesser obvious colors. So honestly, if I were framing this and I would give him my recommendation, I would use that mat, and I would use a traditional wood frame, kind of like what I had there. So think about color and style when you're looking at your piece, and get as many ideas as you can about that. Mats are pretty easy as a framer. They're not terribly expensive. I love using the suede surface ones when I'm doing cross stitch because I think it helps to kind of highlight the handwork, but it's certainly not necessary. The most expensive part of framing is the frame itself, and that's certainly where you're going to spend a lot of money. If you have a custom frame, it's going to have the same edges all the way around the sides. But there are ways to save money there too. If you see a frame that you like in a flea market or a yard sale or an antique shop, as long as it's bigger than the size of your piece, even if it's not the perfect proportions, you can bring that in. I know I use those kind of frames, and I would hope most custom framers would accommodate you. I doubt if the big box stores will do it though. So if you go to some of those places, they might say you have to purchase our frames here, but you can save a lot of money. Sometimes you can buy a nice frame for $20, $30 rather than paying $100 for it. The only issue there is if the frame is different proportions, your mat may be a little wider at the top and the bottom than it is on the sides or something like that. But a framer should be able to work with you and help you to find a good way to handle that. That's the best way to save money on framing, is to find a framer who will do it with the frame that you bring in. But of course, if it's a piece that's important, if it's a piece that you're giving to somebody else or it has real significance, I would always recommend you find that perfect frame, get a custom size. That way all your proportions are going to be the same all the way around and everything will be exactly as you like. let's see, I think that's probably, oh, I did want to say a little bit about stretching your cross stitch. There are several methods there. I use, generally speaking, depending on how stiff the fabric is, I use stainless steel pins and this acid-free tape. I like that as probably my preferred method. Once everything is flat and I've stretched it nicely, used a few pins to keep it in place around the edges, I use the acid-free tape to tape it down and keep it strong and flat. You can do lacing. If that's something that you prefer and you know how to do it, you're probably better off doing that yourself than bringing it into a framer. Personally, I know how to do it, but I don't think, from my perspective, the pieces look as good that way. And so I don't recommend it a lot, but if you need it. And again, that's a way to save money. If you do know how to stretch your own piece and put it on a piece of foam board, obviously that's something that the framer doesn't have to worry about. But remember, get you some acid-free foam board. Maybe your framer, I would sell you a piece if you wanted. If you came in here with a piece, you wanted to stretch it and get it ready yourself, I would sell you a piece of foam core, and you can come back in and I can do the framing for you later. So just some tips and tricks, and enjoy that. If you want to look at it again, enjoy that beautiful quilt at the beginning made by my friend Bonnie. So I'm going to end today. Wish you well as you start thinking about projects and kitting things up for 2024. As always, remember the value of the legacy of these wonderful handmade projects that surround us. Take care. Bye-bye.